Hello, and welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cone, and I'm pleased to serve as host for this podcast series. Today, we are so privileged to have with us Alexandra Holsgrove Jones. She is the partner of Knowledge and ESG at TLT. Welcome, Alexandra.
Hello, Pam. So lovely to be here.
Thank you. And I want to start by having you first describe your title, Partner for Knowledge and ESG at the law firm TLT. Tell me what that means.
Well, it's probably quite an unusual title, so it might be useful for me to give a little bit of background to how I got there. So I trained and qualified at Herbert Smith, as it then was, over 20 years ago. And I actually qualified as a litigator, but decided within a couple of years that that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I switched to being a real estate lawyer. I joined TLT in 2006 and mostly acted on large development projects, mainly for public sector organisations, but I also did some general landlord and tenant work for primarily retailers. After having my son, who's now 16, so he's just finished his GCSEs, I wanted a role that required me to travel less and have more regular hours. So I became a professional support lawyer. And back then, we didn't have the same flexible working options as lawyers now have. So it was a path that enabled me to have an interesting role, but also work part-time. Things have changed though. We've moved on, both for fee earners and PSLs, or knowledge lawyers, as we are now called at TLT. And my role has really definitely evolved and expanded in the last 15 years. When I started as a PSL, the role largely involved delivering training, drafting precedents, and keeping lawyers up to date on things that were coming up on the horizon. There was definitely no prospect of becoming a partner, and it was largely a sort of behind the scenes role. But that has changed, and our knowledge lawyers are really key to the success of the firm. And it's testament to the value placed on our knowledge lawyers that we have a career pathway to partnership at TLT. So in terms of the ESG element of my role, one of my areas of focus has for a long time been on climate conscious drafting. And that started many years ago when green leases were a fairly new concept. Over the past few years, I've worked really closely with the Chancery Lane Project, who, for anyone who hasn't come across them, is a pro bono initiative that brings legal professionals together from all over the world to find practical climate conscious drafting solutions. So a really great organisation to be involved with. And in 2023, I worked there with them to create a built environment climate contracts tool. Bit of a mouthful, but basically it brings together the whole life cycle of the built environment to direct users to climate conscious drafting that can be used in documents throughout the life of a built environment asset. So that's from pre-planning through planning, construction, occupation, sale or lease of the property. And that we then updated that a couple of years ago to take into account the new version of the Green Lease Toolkit from the Better Buildings Partnership. So collaborating with both of those organisations. So that's where my focus on ESG started, with climate. But from there, it's expanded to cover ESG more widely because obviously it is all interlinked. You can't look at environments without considering societal factors and impacts. And nothing is going to work effectively without good governance. We often refer to the G of ESG as being the glue that sticks everything together. So I started and run our firm-wide ESG working group. I set up the role of ESG ambassador and created an internal hub that draws everything together on ESG. And that's both in terms of what we are doing as a firm and also how we work with our clients. So I also lead on integrating ESG into all of our legal services because ESG isn't a distinct area, it permeates everything. And ensuring everyone is aware of this and what their role is in pushing the ESG agenda forward is really key. And our knowledge lawyers are key to that because they can take the ESG concepts and then translate it for the lawyers in their relevant practice areas. from the viewpoint of what TLT is doing as a firm, so doing operationally, I also sit on our impact committee, which is about what we are doing in terms of our impact on people, planet, and places. So my role is really about linking everything together, because you can't look at any of the elements in isolation. And part of that is about conversations with clients, but a lot is about internal education and just raising awareness of the issues so that everyone can learn from each other and share their successes and challenges. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an overview of
Yeah,
why I've got that title.
absolutely. And I want to go back and ask a couple questions about the Chancery Lane project. I am familiar with them, and I'm glad you brought them up because it's certainly a terrific resource for lawyers. You talked about building a toolkit and providing sample contracts and so forth. How do lawyers who are interested in seeing that, how do they access that? Do they have to become a member of Chancery Lane Project to see those tools?
Absolutely not. It is all open source, freely available on the Chancery Lane Project website. So the tool that I referred to sits on their built environment page, but they have lots of different sector pages. And there's also you can search by topic, you can search by practice area, you can search by jurisdiction. So you'll find that from wherever you are in the world, depends where you are in the world, but that there are clauses for lots of different jurisdictions. And even if there isn't anything for your jurisdiction, you can look at what there is, and you can look at the concepts, and then you can adapt. And that's the point. It's not meant to be a here you go, you can drop it into your contract. It's always going to have to be amended, like any precedent. It's going to have to be amended, but it's such a useful starting point, and it's really heartening to see the collaboration that takes place. So at TLT, we have been involved in not only the tool, but also in drafting clauses and peer reviewing clauses. So they are drafted by firms and then peer reviewed to give that confidence to people that it's not just one random person's view on what could be put in. It has gone through a review process to hopefully make them market standard.
I'm so glad you brought them up because I think in all the podcasts I've done, nobody has talked about this tremendous resource that's available at Chancery Lane Project. So I'm glad that came up today. And then I'm also very pleased to hear you say that at TLT and more broadly, ESG is not a distinct separate practice areas, but rather it's something that permeates everything. And I frankly think that's the way it should be. My goal, if I live long enough, is to see not ESG as something separate, but something that's just integrated into what every lawyer thinks about every day as part of the work they're doing in their specific practice area. So in your work, tell me, what are you seeing as the hottest either emerging or current trends with the people you serve, whether you're in-house, your lawyers in-house at TLT, or your client constituents?
I think there are a lot, but if I had to pick out the key ones, I guess I would go with challenges of embedding your ESG goals throughout an organization. So ensuring everyone knows it's their job. It's not just something that's dealt with by EDIW or sustainability. It's everyone's day to day. As you say, I'd love to get to the point where we didn't need to talk about it at all because it was just normal. Clear messaging across organizations, that's also been coming up as a challenge, particularly in global organizations where viewpoints and attitudes can vary. Regulation, keeping on top of the ever-growing regulation that's, put forward, and particularly again, where those regulations differ across jurisdictions. And, what we'll be talking about probably later, getting to grips with what's going on in your supply chain. And that's about setting the focus because nobody can delve into everything, having a clear message around what you want suppliers to do, getting the information, being able to trust it, monitoring compliance, and deciding what to do if there's a breach. So all those things, getting a handle on everything and tying everything together. I would say that is a key challenge, but also a key opportunity. And that's something that we've been talking about a lot.
And I'm glad you brought up supply chain because one of the things we wanted to talk about is the role you're going to play at Legal ESG London, which is 2 weeks from now. You are going to give a presentation on day one, and you are going to moderate a panel on day two. And the subject of both of those sessions is supply chain. So tell me why you chose that and what you think the conversation will focus on.
Yeah, you're right. I'll be talking about supply chains because I think getting to grips with your supply chain is really key to progressing an ESG agenda. Without a resilient supply chain, an organization might well struggle to operate. And looking at the supply chain through an ESG lens can really help identify strengths and weaknesses and also create a competitive advantage. On the emission side, without engaging your supply chain, you might struggle to achieve net zero targets because supply chain emissions can account for a huge amount, from 60 to 90% in some cases, depending on the sector, obviously, in the business. And aligning goals with suppliers is really going to be crucial for reaching net zero targets. But as we know, ESG isn't just about climate, it's not just about emissions, it's about whether you or not you can actually do business at all. So if your supplies aren't available because of a climate event, for example, can you get hold of the raw materials? Even if you can get them, can you process them? What if the workers can't effectively work because there's extreme heat or there's a power outage? Even if you can manufacture, can you transport if essential infrastructure has been hit by a climate event? Even if you can do all of these things, your costs probably have increased. Do you still have a viable product with those increased costs? Another aspect is, what if your suppliers are in litigation because of their own practices? For example, greenwashing, modern slavery. That there are obviously others, and I'm sure others at Legal ESG will be speaking in more depth about these. But will your customers want goods that have been produced in this way in your supply chain? Will their costs increase because of the litigation? Will they go insolvent? If your costs increase because of any or all of these things and your profits are hit, will your business survive? So all of these things mean that you have to look at your supply chain through an ESG lens to ensure that it is resilient. So as you say, on day one, I'll be talking about ESG and supply chain agreements, and we'll be joined by my colleague, Emma Davis, who's going to talk about some practical drafting solutions. So hopefully people will find that useful. And then the panel on supply chains, I think, will be some really interesting discussion, because we'll be looking at, how law firms, as part of their client's supply chain, can meet their clients' ESG requirements, but also how law firms are applying ESG standards to their own suppliers, because everybody's really part of a web, aren't they? Rather
Yes.
than a chain.
Yep, that's exactly right. What are the biggest challenges do you think are coming our way in the rest of 2025, 2026 when it comes to ESG?
I think, the breadth of ESG, because it does cover everything. So tying everything together, but also trying to have some focus to identify the key areas to tackle first. And that's going to vary for every organization, but also maybe changing the viewpoint slightly. There's been a bit of negativity coming predominantly from the US about ESG, changing the viewpoint from looking at the cost of implementing ESG initiatives to looking at the cost of not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I read something once where it said, engaging on carbon reduction and all these other steps that are necessary for good ESG practices is costly, but it's nothing compared to the cost of doing nothing, right? And that's a great thing to keep in mind. One of the questions I like to ask all my guests as we're coming up on our time is, given the current environment, geopolitics, negativity, pushback on ESG, political headwinds, we're still working in this space. So something must be giving us hope. What gives you hope?
The enthusiasm and commitment that I see every day from our EDIW and sustainability teams, from the clients when I speak to them, from everyone at TLT. Nobody has ever said to me, "Why are you talking about this? It's just not important." Everyone knows it's the right thing to do and that it also makes good business sense. The way organizations are sharing information about what they're doing. I mean, this year we've run a number of roundtables for clients. really to get people sharing their pain points, their challenges, and what's worked, and, you know, collaborating to move us forward, to speed up our collective actions. I think the fact that we're having events like Legal ESG, the number of ESG themed events that you see, people are talking about this, and that means awareness is rising and action is being taken. So I think, yeah, there are a lot of challenges, but there's a huge amount of hope, and the action that we're taking, the way that we're talking about things, and that, you know, more and more people are wanting to be involved in this. I think that's a really great area of hope.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think what I'm seeing is that companies are continuing their actions and their progress and their move forward. They might be talking about it less or differently, but the progress isn't stopping. And hopefully we'll get back to a society where, like we said earlier, this will just be an accepted practice of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your insights today, Alexandra. It's been a delight to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at Legal ESG London in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.